Good morning. I'm Vaughn Pomiston. Thank you to all here today gathering for our third annual commemoration and the 40th year of the holiday's federal designation. This day serves as recognition and remembrance of the legacy of the life and legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A day on rather than a day off encourages action and service to our communities. Today, we take time to revisit the teachings of Dr. King, who pioneered a path for equality through relentless struggle and unwavering hope. To fully honor Dr. King, we must also pay tribute to Mrs. Coretta Scott King. For her civil rights activism in the 1950s and 60s, for her role in the Montgomery bus boycott, her advocacy for the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and voting rights of 1965, and who led the movement for the creation of the King holiday. A few points of note before we get started. This event is being recorded for future playback. Closed captioning has been enabled for this event. However, if you do not see closed captioning appearing across the bottom of your screen, navigate to the toolbar on your Zoom screen and select either Show Captions or More, then Show Captions. Lastly, please feel free to use the chat to ask questions to the speaker or members of the DEI Steering Committee. I would like to thank the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Steering Committee for their work in planning this event. And next, I would like to invite SMOC's president and our Chief Executive Officer, Susan Gentili, to say a few words.
Thank you, Vaughn. It's wonderful to see everyone this morning. Hello and welcome. As we commemorate our third annual commemoration of the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This year's theme, protecting freedom, justice, and democracy in the spirit of nonviolence, seems more relevant today than ever. Our values of freedom, justice, democracy, racial equity, inclusion and acceptance feel battered by the discord in the country and the words and deeds of some of our leaders. It is important for us to hold tight to our own values and to stand together to affirm them. We are so fortunate at SMOC to be part of a welcoming community that is anchored by our board of directors. Thank you to board members in attendance today. Thank you to our DEI steering committee members, and especially to our co-chairs, Rahi Wada and Yvonne Brown, who along with our diversity and health equity officer, Aaron Young, take a lead in advancing equity and inclusion every day, and we will continue that at SMOC. We value that very deeply and hold those truths to be at the core of our agency. Thank you to Vaughn Pomison for acting as our MC today, and to our very special keynote speaker, Dr. Shayla Walker, who has an extensive background in helping people to be prepared to confront tough social challenges. As difficult as the challenges may feel, it is important that we take care of ourselves and each other, and I feel grateful to have our team at SMOC to stand with and work with every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I'll now pass this over to Yvonne to speak on behalf of DEI Steering Committee.
Good morning. Rohi Watt and I, Yvonne Brown, co-chairs of the SMOC Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, also known as the DEI Committee, would like to welcome you to our third annual commemoration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The DEI team effort is elastic, not static. No one has the right to dismiss us and squash our worth. We see hope and resilience, for we are all of noble birth. You are part of that team. Others cannot define us. Dr. King knew it. Maya Angelou knew it. He planted the seeds. She harnessed, nurtured, and harvested them through small birds. Some were free, some were caged. We promote love and respect rather than hate or destruction. We are the bountiful fruit that nourishes rather than the spoiled fruit that sickens. We believe in freedom, hope, purpose, and power. We may be disappointed, but we cannot give up. The past has happened. Each of us has gifts to share. As fearless warriors and visionaries, we will screen out ugliness and disparities and replace them with beauty and respect. We are like potholders. We can withstand the heat. Was Maya Angelou the caged bird? If so, how did she handle her misfortune? How would you handle yours? You can live with it as you shrivel up and die with your secret, or you can expel the ugly incident and not let it control or limit you. Renewed energy and hope must replace the shame that you may feel. You are a phenomenal person. Let no one dare to block you. We are the visionaries and the dreamers. We are the thinkers and the doers. It is time to use our footprints to make a positively powerful difference. Now, let us learn more about those little birds. Reverend Faith Tolson, member of the DEI committee, and I will read the poem Caged Bird by Maya Angelou. After the reading, there will be a tribute to Coretta Scott King. Thank you for taking the time to share these moments with us. I'm going to do the first 3 stanzas and Faith will do the next 3. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The cage bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown, but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the cage bird sings of freedom.
The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade wind soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a cage bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadows shout on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The cage bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown, but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the cage bird sings of freedom.
Thank you, Yvonne and Faith. In this poem, Maya Angelou gives voice to a common theme of the American civil rights movement, the longing for freedom and for equality. The free bird is able to live as a free agent in its natural habitat, whereas the cage bird is bound and his wings are clipped to restrict his movements, so he cannot live the life he was born to live. It is said that Angelou began writing the poem as a way to cope with her grief after Dr. King's assassination. And King's dream was for all people to be able to leap on the back of the wind and dare to claim the sky. In his I Have a Dream speech, Dr. King stated, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." And we share in that dream today. As we explore the legacy of Dr. King's teaching, we must also recognize Coretta Scott King as a fearless cultural influencer. She traveled the world speaking to political leaders, consulted on the behalf of racial and economic justice, the rights of women and children, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, LGBT dignity, equal employment, education, and environmental justice. Let's take a moment to watch a video tribute to the life of Coretta Scott King.
along, I have supported my husband in this cause, and at this point, I feel even stronger about the cause.
That we will work with new and bold determination for that glad day when men will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And nations will not rise up against nations, neither will they study war anymore.
I came because whenever it was impossible for my husband to be in a place where he wanted to be and felt that he needed to be, he would occasionally send me to stand in for him. And so today I felt that he would have wanted me to be here.
Washington, Mrs. Martin Luther King led 45,000 candlelight marchers from the Washington Monument to the White House.
The things that have already been revealed that are on record point toward the FBI having certainly known what was happening, and if there was some conspiracy there, that they should have known who the people were that were involved, because he was under constant surveillance, and I cannot believe that they would not have known about all the plots and all the people and where they were at various times.
The observance of this holiday is both an important learning experience and a call to action to address injustice anywhere. Through the holiday, we can learn about the values and responsibilities of our democracy. We can learn about how a great vision and a great nation began to confront and nonviolently challenge institutional racism. I still hear people say that I should not be talking about the rights of lesbian and gay people, and I should stick to the issue of racial justice. But I hasten to remind them that Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere."
Next, we would like to welcome our keynote speaker, dedicated to cultivating change and nurturing growth, Dr. Shayla Elise Walker. LCSW is a multifaceted professional who seamlessly blends the roles of a compassionate social worker, a dynamic social work professor, and an inspiring public speaker. Rooted in a fierce commitment to education, advocacy, and empowerment, Dr. Walker exemplifies the synergy of academia and activism. With a distinguished academic background, Shayla holds her Bachelor of Social Work, BSW, and Master of Social Work, MSW degrees from Virginia Commonwealth University, and her Doctor of Philosophy degree, PhD, in Transformative Social Change from Saybrook University. Dr. Walker has engaged in social work practice in various fields, including public, private, and after-school educational settings, child and family welfare settings, acute psychiatric hospitalization, and outpatient therapy, where she has consistently demonstrated an extensive understanding of the intricate dynamics with individuals, families, and communities. As an esteemed social work professor at Longwood University, Dr. Walker imparts a wealth of knowledge to the next generation of social workers. Her pedagogical approach goes beyond textbooks to nurture critical thinking, empathy, and culturally sensitive practices among her students. Serving as the Director of Undergraduate Research Apprentice Program, URAP, and the founding co-director of the U.S. Race and Ethnic Studies minor, she believes that education is essential for driving lasting change and equipping individuals to tackle complex social challenges. Beyond the academic realm, Dr. Walker is a passionate public speaker, weaving personal experiences, academic insights, and real-world anecdotes into captivating narratives. Her talks resonate with diverse audiences, and she explores racial justice, restorative healing, mental wellness, self-care, and empowerment, leaving an indelible impact that motivates reflection and action. The recipient of Virginia Commonwealth University's Black History in the Making Award and multiple teaching, mentoring, and research award nominations, she continues to advocate for marginalized voices and amplify underrepresented perspectives. Her vision extends towards a future where social work, mental health, and racial justice converge, fostering understanding, positive transformation, and a more equitable and empowered society. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Walker. I will turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Thank you so much to Aaron and the South Middlesex Opportunity Council Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Steering Committee for inviting me to fulfill the esteemed honor of being this year's keynote speaker. There are few times in life when moments align in a way that lets you know you are right where you are supposed to be. This is one of those moments, and I am profoundly grateful for this opportunity. Thank you for your warm welcome, and thank you to everyone who has participated in this event so far. As you heard, I am Dr. Shayla Elise Walker. I am a licensed clinical social worker, a social work professor, workshop facilitator, and public speaker. I am a wife, a sister, a daughter, an aunt, a niece, a mentor, and a friend. Beyond the titles and roles, I am a straight, cisgender, middle-class, Christian, able-bodied, English-speaking, American, adult, Black woman. And I like to believe that I'm a great person. I believe I'm a great person, not just because I'm nice and I'm courteous and I say please and thank you, but because I have also pursued a helping profession and have devoted my life to supporting individuals in their journey of discovery, healing, belonging, and restoration. I am dutiful, responsive, empathetic, caring, encouraging, thoughtful, helpful, and generous. I feel I go above the call, engaging as a citizen leader, serving and volunteering as I am able, and engaging in my civic responsibilities like voting in local and state and national elections. I protect freedom, justice, and democracy in the spirit of Kingian nonviolence by promoting fairness, equity, self-exploration, and self-evaluation. I love all people, even the ones who I do not know and have not yet met. And yet, I do still have my bouts with road rage. Let the person in front of me drive just a little too slow, and I'm confronted with the reality that patience is not one of my best virtues. I give to others, sometimes to the extent of burnout, but then I wallow in the pity of martyrship when I could have done better to honor my boundaries. I sometimes struggle to explore the perspectives of others when it feels egregiously obvious that they are in the wrong. I spend too much money on frivolous things when I could be more responsible by investing it for the benefit of my future children. I rant and rave when I feel disrespected, and I can be quick to cut someone out of my life when I feel they've crossed the line. But I still know that I'm a good person because even though I'm not perfect, I'm building a platform based on authenticity and vulnerability. I am willing to show my flaws and how I am addressing them. So I promise you, I am a good person. But would the person who I just cut off in traffic agree with me? What about the people who hold space for and support me through the complaints, fatigue, and resentfulness of burnout? How are the unsuspecting contributors of my quote unquote justified martyrship responding to the idea that their perceived dependence on me is factoring into my exhaustion? How do individuals on the other side of the disagreement view how I have navigated the challenging communication? What lasting impression have I made on the persons I have ghosted or excommunicated because they did not treat me the way I wanted to be treated? Did I treat them how they wanted to be treated? Yes, you heard my brief biography, the one that I wrote to highlight my achievements and accomplishments thus far. You have heard about Dr. Walker, but who is Shayla when the cameras are off, the live stream is over, and I go about my business at 11:05 on a Friday morning? How will you assess my character in the moments that I am off screen? For surely these impact the me you see on the screen. I had these similar thoughts as I was studying nonviolence in my doctoral program. The first course that I took as a student in Saybrook University's Transformative Social Change doctoral program was the theory and practice of nonviolence. Within the 15-week course, each student chose to study the nonviolent practices of Mahatma Gandhi or Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I typically choose to study new perspectives that I'm not yet familiar with, but for some reason, my intuition told me to study the more familiar of the two, maybe in preparation for this moment. I studied Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You see, I was all too familiar with Dr. King as I would grow up with my grandfather telling me stories about the civil rights movement and marching with Dr. King. My grandfather told me that he and Dr. King were college roommates, and my grandfather showed me pictures of when my grandfather marched or slept outside in the mud because his Blackness kept him from accessing hotels. When I think about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., one of my earliest and fondest memories occurred as a young child at church. On Wednesday evenings, my grandfather, a career pastor, and my mother, the minister of music, would conduct choir rehearsal at the church that my grandfather founded in Columbus, Ohio. My grandmother would dutifully and lovingly babysit my sisters and me in my grandfather's study. And on one of the walls, my grandfather posted Dr. King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech. My sisters and I would take turns reading it aloud to my grandmother while my grandfather and mother were at choir rehearsal. The speech began with an ode to the Emancipation Proclamation, a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice, a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But the speech then immediately referenced how 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. How the promissory note of freedom had instead been a bad check, a check which has come back marked with insufficient funds. As Dr. King continued the speech, impacted by the power, presence, and energy of the estimated 250,000 attendees, he went off script and started noting his dreams that America will live out the true meaning of all men being created equal. Of the 6 dreams recounted in the speech, my favorite has always been the dream that one day his children would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. As a child, single digit in age, I thought I knew what that meant, that I would be judged not by what I looked like, but by how I behaved and by the person I was and strove to be. So in this doctoral course, I read The Radical King, a collection of 23 speeches, sermons, and essays by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I studied his nonviolent philosophy and how it compared to pacifism and other nonviolent practices. I thought about Dr. King and the massive calling on his life to lead the world in activities of nonviolence, to travel the nation strategizing, boycotting, marching, and advocating for how to make the world a more equitable place for everyone. I thought about the weight of listening to the plights of others, of holding space for their emotions, of encouraging them and supporting them. I thought about the trauma of witnessing violence that was inflicted upon men, women, and children who were nonviolent justice seekers. I consider the fear and hypervigilance he must have experienced when his home was bombed, when he and Mrs. King screened calls and letters containing vitriolic death threats, and when he was stabbed, when he was beaten, and when he was jailed, all while navigating what it meant to be a loving father and committed husband. How did Dr. King manage that? I learned of some of the violence he faced. I know how, after his home was bombed, he seriously considered hiring armed security to protect him and his family, but he ultimately chose not to, because if there was ever a time that armed security was needed, it would counter all that he modeled about nonviolence. I knew that he said, to believe in nonviolence does not mean that violence will not be inflicted upon you. The believer in nonviolence is the person who will willingly allow himself to be the victim of violence, but will still never inflict violence upon another. I knew these things, and yet the clinician in me still wanted to know more about Dr. King, about Martin Luther, about Michael Luther King Jr. What did he write in his private journals? How many times did he break down into tears in Miss Coretta's arms, on her shoulders, or in her lap? What were his initial private responses when the Birmingham church bombing killed Addie Mae Collins, Carol Denise McNair, Carol Rosamund Robertson, and Cynthia Dion Wesley? How did he handle his bouts of depression when the outlook was bleak, when people failed to remain nonviolent, and when his exhaustion was getting the better of him? How did he go to God with the weight of so many people watching him, depending on him, dreaming with him? 5 years later, in conducting my research for this keynote address, I am closer to understanding the answers to these questions thanks to Mrs. Coretta Scott King's memoir, My Life, My Love, My Legacy. Valedictorian from Lincoln Normal High School, graduate of Boston's New England Conservatory of Music, professional musician, former co-chair of both the National Committee for Full Employment and the Full Employment Action Council, advocate, activist, author, founder of the King Center, recipient of honorary degrees from over 60 colleges and universities, mother of 4 children, and wife to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King once said that a wife can either make or break a husband. My wife was always stronger than I was through the struggle. In the darkest moments, she always brought the light of hope. I am convinced that if I had not had a wife with the fortitude, strength, and calmness of Corey, I could not have withstood the ideals and tensions surrounding the movement. Listening to her memoir, within the first few minutes, it's very easy to envision Mrs. King as an emblem of humility, strength, bravery, resolve, passion, purpose, and hope. Proponent of the beloved community, a spiritual bond that claims the energy and commitment of a diverse group of people who desire to serve a cause larger than themselves, fueled by unconditional love, feeling like family, and transcending race, religion, and class. Mrs. King was taught to face challenge and look it in the eye, because if you run away from it, it can shoot you in the back. At the end of their first date, Dr. King was swooning over Mrs. King so hard that he started talking about marriage. Reflecting that Dr. King was showing all the signs of falling in love at first sight, Mrs. King shared in her memoir that Dr. King had 4 things he was looking for in a wife: character, intelligence, personality, and beauty. And he believed that Ms. Coretta Scott embodied all of them. Initially unimpressed with the 22-year-old, 5'7" future Dr. King, Mrs. King allowed herself to be led not by her presumptions of what it meant to be with a young Southern pastor, but she let how she felt around him, his personality, confidence, honesty, trustworthiness, relentless self-evaluation, forgiveness, and commitment to continuous improvement guide her feelings. In fact, throughout her life, there were several times that she allowed herself not to be swayed by the leanings of prejudice when approached with counter-narratives. When reflecting on the prejudice and racism she experienced due to her race, she has noted, "I will be Black for the rest of my life," while insinuating that her social identity has no bearing on her character. Originally a self-identified pacifist, Mrs. King believed that standing up for your rights should never infringe on the rights of others, that dreams do not occur in the absence of fear, and that justice is love in calculation. Her memoir challenged me to consider how I will respond when I face my own tests of endurance. It reaffirmed that I should never discount the small, quiet moments because they matter too. And the content of our character extends far past the people we know, but can be traced through the lasting impact of our behaviors, even when we are far removed from this earth. We must never forget that we have something to offer, and that moral concerns know no geographic or relational boundary. That even if we don't always know where we are going, we must keep our excitement about getting there. Her life affirmed that we must pursue what is right, even if it's different from what we know or what we've been taught. That we should remain open to the new paths that life guides us on, and that we must consistently consider how we will be a link in the chain that guides the next generation towards social justice. Mrs. King reiterated her husband's quote that the way to be integrated with yourself is to be sure to meet every situation with an abounding love. Never hate, because there is no way to, never hate, because it ends up in tragic, neurotic responses. Love is redemptive, but if you have hate, there is no way to redeem them. Keep loving, and they can't stand it too long. By the power of love, they will break under the load. In other words, when met with conflict, let your character outlive their lie. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is often revered now, but he was also one of the most hated people in the world. After all, he was assassinated. He stood for nonviolence and social justice for everyone, not just members of his family, his close friends, his neighbors, or people who looked like him. Dr. King was Mrs. King's best friend, and he once said about her, "As usual, Coretta gave me the reassurance that can come only from one who is as close to you as your own heartbeat." She loved him dearly, but they both knew that he would be taken too soon. After Gandhi's death, Dr. King said, "The world doesn't like people like Gandhi. They don't like people like Christ. They don't like people like Abraham Lincoln. They kill them. And this man, who had done all that for India, who had given his life and had mobilized and galvanized 400 million people for independence, here was a man of nonviolence falling at the hands of a man of violence. Here was a man of love falling at the hands of a man of hate. This seems the way of history." Mrs. King believed that Dr. King's name would one day be added to that list, and it was. He died advocating for what he believed in, and Dr. King, in the words of Montgomery bus boycotter Mother Pollard, worked to, quote, "get to the point where instead of your soul being tired while your feet are rested, get to the point where your feet are tired and your soul is rested." So now, as an adult in my mid-30s, I recognize that the content of my character is so much deeper than what I allow people to see when I know that they are watching. Measuring the content of my character includes holding myself accountable to the quiet thoughts and behaviors I exhibit behind closed doors. It includes recognizing my limits and honoring my boundaries so that I can peacefully remove myself from situations that challenge my stance on nonviolence. It means doing no harm, and doing no harm requires me to learn and be attentive to what is harmful to others, even if I don't feel it is harmful to myself. Measuring the content of my character is not only about the first impression I make, but the lasting impression I leave. It is about showing up for others in the ways I wish someone had shown up for me. It's about pursuing my growth and healing, because while hurt people, I believe that healed people heal people. The content of my character includes seeking and accepting feedback with grace and poise while adjusting for future situations. And as Dr. and Mrs. King have demonstrated, it means going beyond the comfort of our immediate environments to model behaviors that encourage others to join us in our pursuit of making lasting systemic change and achieving social justice. The path of nonviolence is not an easy one. As Dr. King once said, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? And vanity comes along and asks the question, is it popular? Conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must do it because conscience tells him it's right. So how do we know what is right? Maybe we can borrow from John Rawls' egalitarian perspective. According to John Rawls, a just society occurs when there is a veil of ignorance, meaning individuals would freely enter into a new society without worry, preference, or hesitation about what role they will fill. They wouldn't say that they will only enter the society if they are a CEO or make over X amount of money per year, or if they had a large house or a college education. They will willingly enter society even if their position is an undocumented worker, a Black trans woman, or an elderly Jewish male who relies on the use of a wheelchair. In a just society, under the veil of ignorance, a person's status and identity have no bearing on their acceptance, their inclusion, their desire to be included, and to function in society. To understand how our character is contributing to a just society, we must engage in constant critical self-reflection. I start by meditating on my honest and sometimes uncomfortable questions or responses to questions, including, how do I respond when I am met with people who disagree with me or who live differently from me? Am I willing to respect what I don't understand, or am I quick to ignore, to dismiss, to minimize, to judge, to lash out, or to separate myself? Am I able to see beyond my clients, coworkers, family, and friends to consider how my actions impact the larger society? Am I doing enough to create positive change for those who are least fortunate? Do I go out of my way to engage differently, to devote meaningful time to participate in various social, political, advocacy, and activism programs that promote justice for all people, especially people who do not identify as I do? How intentional am I about considering the long and short implications of my daily interactions with my children, family, friends, spouse, partner, colleagues, grocery store workers, store patrons, and others? How often are they receiving the best of me? If people could see my inner thoughts, vulnerabilities, biases, and prejudices, would I be self-conscious or shamed? Or in my innate defensiveness, do I ignore this self-reflective question, knowing that my inner thoughts will always be private, so I can't be judged for what people don't know? When was the last time I created space to meaningfully explore my biases and prejudices beyond my initial awareness, recognizing that it is not a question of if I am biased and prejudiced, but instead, what are my biases and prejudices, and how deeply do they go? In what ways am I actively unlearning them by searching for examples of what else may be true? Do I look for ways to excuse my behavior, or do I take ownership of my actions, regardless of how entitled or deserving I feel? Do I judge the content of my character when I look for proof that I am a good person? Or do I measure myself by regularly looking for areas of improvement and showing myself graceful accountability when making appropriate adjustments? Do I judge other people's decisions, or do I use it as an opportunity to develop my empathy and curiosity for something that I have not experienced, because I recognize that regardless of the situation, until I walk a mile in their shoes or spend 10 minutes in their head, I do not know how their experiences from their perspective led them to the situation for which they are challenged with making a decision. Do I stop to consider what my life would look like if people treated me the way I treat them, if they thought of me what I think of them, if they judged me as I often judge them, we must consider our thoughts most intently, because our thoughts inform our feelings, which guide our actions. It's not to say that we can't have feelings, but our feelings must be deeply explored so we pursue healing and humanity over cloaking ourselves in the performative facade of socialized acceptance and anonymity. It is for me to measure the content of my character and not to pass judgment on my opinion of someone else's. We measure the content of our character not by our position in life or our abilities to succeed, but in our investment to support other people who may not have the privileges that we experience, whether earned or unearned, whether we know them personally or not, whether it is within the expectations of our employment or in our private personal lives. We measure the content of our character when we never allow how we prioritize our values to override our ability to see the humanity in people who prioritize their values differently than we do. Our priority is to always see the humanity of others, even and especially when our values are prioritized differently. How are our actions helping to create a just society? How are we going beyond the comfort of our immediate environment to model behaviors that encourage others to join us in our pursuit to make lasting systemic change and achieve social justice? So on this, the third annual South Middlesex Opportunity Council Day of Commemoration for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I implore you to strongly consider how you will honor Dr. King and Mrs. Coretta Scott's legacy of promoting democracy, freedom, and justice intrapersonally, interpersonally, and systemically through the content and embodiment of your character. I encourage you not to measure your character by reaching for a measuring cup, a ruler, an odometer, or a scale, but instead to reach deep inside of yourself to the uncomfortable shadows of privacy and to explore what is easier left unnoticed. Acknowledge yourself for the times that you got it right, but do not allow that acknowledgement to overshadow the opportunities for accountability, because the content of our character is limited to the extent we choose to pursue our comfort over our growth. Our growth occurs when we adjust our character, not just by our intentions, but by the honest and critical assessment of the perception and impact we are directly and indirectly having on others. Even the smallest of stones can still make a ripple. What energy are we spreading? What impact are we making? How are our decisions, comments, actions, beliefs, and behaviors rippling out to the greater society in ways we can and cannot readily see? My dream is that we will all choose our growth over our comfort, so our pebbles of change create rippling waves of love, acceptance, humility, humanity, justice, and joy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. That was absolutely powerful. Thank you. As we leave today, we challenge each of you here to sit with how you measure the content of your character. How you shift from allyship to advocacy to accountability. how you assume intrinsic responsibility for creating spaces of safety, support, belonging, comfort for your colleagues, for our clients, residents, and peers, for our communities of service. No matter your position at SMOC, you each play a pivotal role in the maintenance of an environment where hope is inspired. Alongside 22 community action agencies in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, more than 600,000 individuals are served annually through programs such as Head Start, job training, housing, food banks, energy assistance, and financial education, and more. Every day, you have the potential to change lives through our mission. Each of you, every single one of you, are our greatest strength, without whom we cannot do the work we do in support of our communities. So we thank you all. As we close, I want to say one last thank you to Dr. Shayla Walker for being here and sharing her wisdom and teachings with us. And thank you to all who made this day possible, the members of the DEI Steering Committee. Thank you all for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day.